Honourable Minister of Finance, the policy on tax credit for private investors is quite commendable, and I will appreciate if that policy also can be extended to the maritime sector. Because if you look at the reference you made with regards to the Barrow River Port, it's a world-class port, completed, but the biggest challenge there now is access road. Infrastructural development has to reach that port and make it viable. We can also explore the policy of concessioning, and in doing this concessioning, we must have at the back of our mind, it is clear to everybody, government alone cannot fund infrastructural development as it concerns our economy. And therefore, we must develop policies that will involve the private sector for them to get fully involved in and participate in growing that aspect of our economy. And in doing this, we must look at sustainability of policy and flexibility of the terms, making it something that can be encouraging so that people can invest their money. I would like us to really look at this issue of concessioning, because I had talking from my experience, there is an organization we're talking with, and they're interested in completing one of our ports that is 58% completed, but in the past 13 years, no investment has been made in that, even if it has not appeared on the national budget until just last year. So we are talking with them. Their intention is to complete the port, own it, run it for a period of time, and then see how we can get it back. But the first question they keep asking is sustainability of policy. They will tell you that if they invest, what is the guarantee? We must find a way to give them these guarantees, because we have to involve the private sector seriously, because government alone, in the light of the current realities, cannot fund our infrastructural needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're right, infrastructure is key, and even before this government and this government, we have explored the various options from BPP to BOTs to the various shades that my sister described earlier on. We have issued infrastructure bonds, diaspora bonds. We continue to issue sukuk bonds every year to fund specific road projects. We have the RITs, and we're exploring other options still, and we're open to advice. The Maritime Bank keeps coming up. And I think from what the gentleman from ATB said, that CBN should be here. Maybe CBN is here. Is CBN here? I don't know, but perhaps the Ministry of Transport and ourselves will need to have a special engagement with the CBN, because investment in infrastructure has to be de-risked, one, and then secondly also it has to be at a low cost. At the minimum, a single-digit investment, because it's very long-term, very long gestation period, and the capital that is required is very, very high. So I agree with you that a Maritime Bank is an option that we will need to consider. But having said that, we have just, a couple of months ago, the President approved the setting up of a company that is called the Infraco, with Central Bank, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority as members, but we also have some multilateral institutions, the Ministry of Finance, as investors in this. This is a 15 trillion naira investment infrastructure company. It already has the first 1 trillion as funding, and is actively looking for investors, and is going to be providing infrastructure, funding infrastructure at very reasonable rates. So we're inviting investors to get into this Infraco, place your investments, or just ask for financing for your viable infrastructure project. But of course, they must be bankable, and they must be beneficial for the country. There are a number of issues, and we can't address all of them. We inherited the problem of MM2 and the Lekki toll gate, issues, but so far, what this administration has done has been consistent. And the President has consistently said, whatever project is on the table, on the ground, that is ongoing, as long as it's beneficial for the populace, completed. So most of these rails that were done now, there's none that we started from the beginning. But the President said completed because it's important for the economy. So I must say that this government has been consistent in its policy. And as far as I remember, there hasn't been any policy reversals that is harmful to investment. Thank you, Chair.
you want something to say? You want to say something?
Sorry, there was a question on whether the RIT, the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme from Professor Adeomi can be extended to. It's a national scheme. That's why I was explaining that right now we're covering up to about 33 states with road networks that is about 1,600 kilometers with about 14 investors. And we are doing this together with the states. The state governors are helping to attract these investors to select roads within their territory. But it doesn't mean that a state cannot also take that executive order and try to see how they can remodel it for their own specific purpose. And it doesn't have to be in roads. You can design a similar thing in a state to address other infrastructure, and we're here to support.
I think you should answer this issue of the fact that you ask us to bring our parents and our homes and so forth. And our grandmothers as well.
Thank you. In relation to that point around cost, I think I've had the benefit of sitting on both sides, and I can share perspectives, which I hope will be helpful. So when we talk infrastructure, we're talking long-term investment. And it starts from an investor perspective. What is the safest instrument in a country for which investors will put in capital? Theoretically, that safest instrument is a federal government bond, as an example. So no investor would go into any investment to say they would earn less than federal government bond, because they could have otherwise put their money in federal government bond and they will stay risk-free for 10 years. So there's a function of where the safest investment is trading at and what investors require. That's number one. Number two is that, do we, within the banking sector, as an example, is there as capital formed such that banks have 20-year capital within themselves? If we think about all of us in this room and many of our wards, what we operate is actually current accounts. There's no savings. So it's in that context, when an investor goes to the bank and says they want 10-year money, the banks, the way they fund themselves, it's always current accounts. And so that problem around cost is also somewhat structural, that the banks may not be able to fund that type of long-term 20-year investment. So comes the alternative, where you start thinking about project bonds, where you start thinking about designated infrastructure funds that can then speak to investors to say, give me money for 20 years because I have a road project that is going to deliver a return over that time. So the message is that when it comes to infrastructure, we have to explore the many options that are available. There is no one solution. Yes, we can have CBN come to the table, but when it comes to infrastructure, it has to be a sustainable point. I think there was an emphasis on sustainability. And it's very important. There's no point coming today, because at the end of the day, if you capitalize an institution, you have to capitalize that institution. The federal government has come out with the InfraCorp, as the Honorable Minister said. That's a fantastic initiative. But they're going to 15 trillion, and they've started with 1 trillion. The 14 trillion would come from investors, and there's a narrative and story that InfraCorp needs to tell investors in order for them to raise the 15 trillion. And that narrative is consistent with the safety of investment, the regulatory framework, the policy consistency, and then the opportunities. The advantage we have as a beautiful nation as we have here in Nigeria is that we have the demographic. So what I think we all need to do together with NITT is to put that story together. That story for roads, that story for rail, that story for maritime, and the liquidity will come. Final point is that the amount of liquidity in the system, not just in Nigeria, but across the finance world, it's at an unprecedented high. So the question is, if there's liquidity, and even in Nigeria, the words from whether you think about pension that's sitting on 12 trillion of assets and growing, within even Nigeria, the banks, asset managers, there's liquidity. So the real question is, how do we channel? What does this liquidity need to be unlocked? And this is the conversations that we are having. So I think I would encourage participants not to look at the problem, but to start looking at the emerging solutions and then how we all can plug in together to unlock it. Thank you.
On the issue of the regional, or the Maritime Bank, before we take the last set of questions, let me just tell you that, as you're aware, there's a regional maritime bank being proposed with the headquarters in Nigeria and with us also actually chairing the bank with our fellow brothers and sisters across the ECOWAS countries. That has moved forward, and I think pretty soon we would have established that. So just to give you an update on the Maritime Bank.